I feel like something like this is a little tricky to introduce, to even set up, because I am lucky enough to be sitting down with a friend, a colleague, a brilliant writer named Tony Farina, and we've been trying to set this up. It was interrupted by me getting COVID. There's been there's just been a couple of factors where, as I'm sitting here right now, I'm like, we made it. We made it. We're here. And I'm really grateful that today we get the chance to talk about your debut novel. Now, I'm
Oh,
holding it up like this is so
wow.
fancy, while you've got the background that's so much cleaner and so
Well, the
much more
background.
efficient.
So that's Jen. Obviously, Jen Costick who does the Costick does the art, but Lee made this image of putting the three things together on the thing. So like, I make the things that go on the inside. That's what I do. The things that go on the outside has nothing to do with me.
Well, you've been, blessed with someone who, as you pointed out, has just done an amazing job of taking over this sort of
Yeah,
role of creating these things for you and putting them up. So feel free to, when you need and as necessary, give as many shouts out to Lee for that, and
yeah,
also to Jen. I remember when you shared the teaser for this art and the excitement we all had at going, oh wow, look at the cool silhouette. In fact, I was talking about those old Victorian style, and my wife
yeah,
just told me they're called a cameo,
yeah.
and it's like
Those
the
are cool.
silhouette. I had no idea what that was called. I simply know I'd seen them before, and this really evoked that sort of feeling for me. The silhouette, the sense of as you're about to enter a world of great wealth, perhaps even austerity.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. And I like that. I like the cameo idea too, because, obviously that is old and Victorian and but it is, and obviously that still happens. People still get those done. But yeah, because the idea with this, the reason that I love this cover is um Four Horsemen does a lot of covers with real people on them, which I get it because people like that, and you hire good looking actors to look good looking and be steamy on the cover, and that's fine. But that isn't this. Like, I'm not that. And my whole thing behind the Austin Chronicles is I want to like unwind this straight white girl itis that is part of Jane Austen's mythos. And she was a straight white girl. That is what she wrote about. But there is really never in any of the books is it really super specific about exactly what the skin tone is or anything. I mean, yes, you just make the assumption because they're rich, they're middle class or rich in Emma's case, women of an age in England, and so you're like, they must be white ladies, and so it's always done that way. Um, and I just didn't want that. I wanted anybody to be able to be the star of this book, and I'm very deliberate about not describing anything other than if they're tall or short or muscular or whatever. Those descriptions, if they need glasses, will all come in with all six of the leads of the six stories. The race will be acknowledged on some of the side characters because that's important to who that character is and what that character is bringing in. So that's why this cover is so cool, because as I was describing it to Jen and what I was looking for, she came up with a couple of really good options. But this one, just like you said, it just hit just right. The golden gates were really spectacular, and even the way that some of the leaves fall, it almost feels like a tassel, like the one that's right by her hand there. And because it's obviously going to a college, there was just a lot of really cool images there that tied into what I'm going for. Because I want anybody to say, like, I could be Junior. And yes, Junior is a person who was born female and identifies as female, but that doesn't mean you can't find yourself in her. That's the goal. And for the next one, Maggie, and then Mary and Jane, and as we move through them all, I want each reader to be like, oh yeah, I identify with that character in this way, and regardless of my race or gender or age, I could be her. I could be that person. So that's the goal.
I would like to make a clip of this and share this with others. I feel you've just given us a bit of a masterclass on how to set up a whole wide range of things that your book covers, that I can then just go, so we're just going to walk through that now, because
Good.
you've just laid it out for us in so many
Yeah.
great ways. I haven't even pointed out the fact that this is part of the Austen Chronicles. This
It
is book
is.
one in the Austen Chronicles. Now, for anyone who's going, well, what's the Austen Chronicles? Perhaps it's a good opportunity to point out that what you are doing is capturing a really interesting magic behind someone's work and saying, okay, now what if we give this the opportunity to cut out all the expectations that have come with this work and present it to a world that can enter into it however they would like to. As you pointed out, can you see yourself in this book? You should be able to in many ways and not feel like there's a constraint that says, well, this could be you, but you're not this. Or instead, it's how many different ways that this come as close to your experience as possible. So, one, maybe a little bit of history. What are these books from Jane Austen that this is referencing and pulling into the present?
Sure. So Jane Austen she wrote six completed adult novels, like as an adult. She has a couple of novellas that she wrote, The Watsons and Love and Friendship. Those were her juvenilia. I think she wrote The Watsons when she was like 15 or something. Um, and then Love and Friendship shortly thereafter. And that's an epistolary novel, which I don't love, but epistolary novels in general. Um, because it's like you would never write that in a letter, but I also get it. I get it. Like we've both written in first person, and you're like the first person doesn't say that either. But so it's what it is. But so I'm focusing on the six. So she wrote six novels, and they're not connected. They're just six novels about class and life, and they're works of satire, and they all take place in early early 19th century England. That's when they were all published, like late 18th century, early 19th century, right? That's when she was writing them, and that's when they were published. But you essentially think of them as like the 18 aughts is around then, is when most of them take place. And then the last few were published post mortem. So like in 1814, 1812, 1815. But she was writing them, as a young woman in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and that's when they came out. That's when they take place. So there is, as you said, an expectation about what they are, and the language is of a certain language. It is done of a daughter of a minister who was educated, and it's written that way. It's like that she just is writing the way that she is, and so the language is obviously it's English. It's not Shakespearean English. It's not Chaucerian English. It's definitely not Beowulf. It's not Old English. Um, but it is still an English that is different than what we're used to, and of course, it's very British. So it's a plotting British. She wrote plotting British novels, and so to that end, people think one of two things about them. They either think these are kissing books because they see the movies and the TV shows, and they see Colin Firth climbing out of the water, which is not a scene in Pride and Prejudice, anyway, the book. But that's like the most famous scene from one of the BBC things is Colin Firth crawling out of a pond and making everybody's knees buckle as he's all handsome and swoony, um, which is fine. Get whatever, wet Darcy, you go. But the idea is that's what people think. They think it's that, or they just think it's like a silly book about girls who want to get married. And in fact, almost none of them want to get married. Like that is not the theme of any of the books. And so they're not necessarily kissing books, although they all do end with a wedding, and they aren't people who are obsessed with. There are people around them who are obsessed with their wedding, but these are books that are about personhood, being a woman in particular, being an intelligent woman, ownership, class, the vast gender divide, education as a way to bring equality, as you and I are educators. Education is the great equalizer, in my opinion, as it was for me anyway. Growing up not well to do, and education has got, and I'm not still well to do. It's not like I'm rolling. I am an English teacher, but I am comfortable because of that, my education. Like I couldn't do my job if it weren't for that. So like Jane wrote about all these things, but there's just this sense. And so this one, the first one of the series is Welcome to Mansfield. Um, I was doing a character study on the main character of this book when I was finishing up my MFA. Uh-oh. Now you're back.
Yeah, it was the I went for the mute unmute key, and I guess my cursor drifted up, and it put you in solo. So I was
Oh,
suddenly
you
like,
were
"Oh,
still
that's
there. So I was like, oh no,
yep, I'm
he's
still
gone.
here."
Okay,
No,
I
it
didn't
just
know.
brought you up and sort of
I
made
was
you the
like, hey,
star
just
for a
looking at
minute.
me
So
instead of looking at you. That was weird.
no, no,
Like
you're fine. You're
staring
fine.
at a mirror. Anyway, so I was doing a character study of this character for something for my MFA program, and I always felt that Mansfield Park was misunderstood. It is the longest, it's the densest, it's the only book that we follow the main character from childhood to adulthood. All the rest of them are like snippets of their life. Like we meet Lizzie Bennet. The reason everybody loves Pride and Prejudice as their favorite is because it is probably the best constructed. It is so tight of a book. It is so well done. I mean, so I get why everybody loves it. And Lizzie is such a fully formed character. She lands with on both of her feet. And then, she still grows, but she's 21 and she's a boss. And so there's a lot of like, ooh, you either want to be Lizzie or you want to be with Lizzie. There's a lot of that going on.
Right.
And so I get it, but this one, and to be fair, this book ends the original book. Spoiler alert for a several 100-year-old book. She marries her first cousin at the end, which is gross and not unheard of at the time. And actually, that happens throughout the Austen verse. It happened all the time in the 1700s and 1800s. Keep in mind that Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip had the same grandmother who was Queen Victoria. So just let everybody sit with that.
At the
So
time,
this
this
is
was considered proper
it
or
was just
even
a thing.
expected to a degree.
100%. And so all of these things are stopping Mansfield Park from being the book that people want to read. It's everybody's least favorite. It's the one that people say I couldn't get through it. And I was like, I just think people are misunderstanding what it is. Because Fanny Price, the main character, which of course Fanny means something different now than it did when she wrote it. It meant Francis Jr. And in America, it means one thing, and in England, it means something else. But both of them are not things you'd want to name a girl in 2000 and now, and I'm writing it in the 2020s. So I changed all that up, and I was just like, let's just see what I can do with it. Let's just play around. And when I first wrote it, it was just kind of cheeky fun, and I put other minor characters in the book because I always felt that Fanny was a minor character in her own book. She's the heroine, but she's a minor character. She's on par with Mary Bennett and Maggie Dashwood and Jane Fairfax and Walt Elliott and these other side characters. And to a degree, when we get to Northanger Abbey, Kat will be the star. The character that you meet from that is a history professor who in the Mansfield Park or in the Northanger Abbey book introduces Kat to this new world. So I'm going to have him be the bridge, but we're not going to, don't worry, everybody, we're not going to follow an 80-year-old man around. That's not the YA book everybody's dreaming of. But he will clearly still be our end point for that story. So I'm breaking, like when we get to her book, we haven't met her yet, but we met someone who knows her. It was my way in. But anyway, I didn't plan on writing a whole series. It was just going to retell this. It was just going to be called, Mansfield College, whatever I was going to call it. It was just called Mansfield at first. And then when I through our friend Tanya, heard about Four Horsemen, and it was like, oh, they only do series. And one day Lee and I were talking, and I was just like, well, I mean, why not? What would preclude me from sharing the universe? I've already done it. I've already shared the universe. They all already now exist in the same universe in the same time and space. What if I pitched it as a series? And so I did. I had to rework a few things in my head. Like I said, Dr. Allen instead of Kat. Like I could have, of course, before this got published, added Kat, added a throwaway line to her there. But I didn't. I don't feel like I needed to do that. I think I've established, by the time we get to her book, the universe will be well established. So we'll be introducing new characters as we go anyway, and some other Austen characters will show up too. So that is what I'm doing. That was a long-winded way of saying that's what I'm doing. That's how I got here. And the idea being, yeah. So the cool thing was, as an early review, one of the ARC readers, Susan Jocelyn is her name, sent me an email and said, hey, I got your ARC. I'm reading this thing. And I met her through Tanya too. Like I've never met her, but I've read one of her books before and offered her some feedback on it. And, she just was signed up for my newsletter. And so she got the ARC. Anybody who had signed up for my newsletter got a copy of the ARC. And she read it, and not the Raiders of the Lost Ark, but the advanced reader copy. And so she
Well
said,
clarified.
yeah, she said it works. So she said she started reading it. and then stopped because she had never read Mansfield Park. And once she got to a point in this book, she felt like she understood it. She stopped, then went and read all of Mansfield Park, which she had up to that point never been able to do, then came back and finished this. So mission accomplished.
I think now is there a? I'm just gonna go on this for a
Yeah.
minute. Is there a group who looks after the estate of Jane Austen? Because knowing that you could be the bridge to new readers to her original classics is something I'd like to go ahead and point out now, and for somebody to follow up on later, because that's the kind of story where it reminds me of how when Baz Luhrmann sort of threw everybody into like this wild Miami sort of experience that was his Romeo and Juliet take, that
Loved. Yeah.
suddenly people looked right back at the text and went, well, when you do it like that, it makes sense. And then suddenly, like people were suddenly invigorated by like Kenneth Branagh picking up some of these beautiful moments and saying, okay, what if a Shakespearean actor who's also gotten into directing can try and accomplish the same thing, but with the original material, it
You're talking
revived a
about
lot of
his
these
Love
great
Labor's
classics.
Lost, his musical Love Labor's Lost. Is that the one you're thinking of? Well, Kenneth did it's done a ton.
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
the
yeah.
thing. I'm thinking of that, but I'm also thinking of the fact that he's recently now moved into the mysteries, like
Oh, the Hercule Poirot.
Orient
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Express
yeah.
and things like that, where he's suddenly seeing that there's this way to look into the past and bring to the present, which I feel you're doing as well. And I feel that example you just pointed out encapsulates perfectly what is possible when you've got a modern take that says, okay, here's what you weren't able to get past, and now that you can and enjoy the part of the story, do you wonder about what you might have missed like
That's the
afterwards? What
hope.
aren't you curious about? And so I would go ahead and just let the Austin estates know, you might want to keep tabs on this guy, because by book 2 or 3, if they're seeing a pickup in sales, I'm going to go ahead and happily write the article that says, did you notice a trend? Because I did. And we should pay attention to the fact that
Aw.
if you're bringing to life and reinvigorating these classics, hey man, there's sorts of titles that goes with things like that.
I mean, that's awesome. That's awesome to think about. I mean, that would be amazing. I mean, she's in the public domain, which makes it easy to do, obviously.
It
So there's
helps.
that. I'm sure there is. I know that where our friend Mike lives in Southampton, there is like the Austin house is there, and she lived in Bath, they say, and she lived all around different parts of England. She never really left, England. She was because she died relatively young and was a unmarried woman of a time. So her scope was small, but she saw the world, I think. So yeah, I love that idea. I would love that. And I do think, like I just watched Polite Society, um, which is a brilliant film that is also a love letter to Jane Austen, but with Kung Fu. So
I
um
saw the trailer for that. I really loved lady parts,
it's
and
the
so
same writer director, and the woman who plays the drummer in Lady Parts
yep.
plays the older sister.
All those little pieces were catching
Yeah,
for me as I was watching. I was like,
yeah,
wait, and I,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I also feel like our friend Ria
Yeah, oh
made a
yeah, yeah.
tag about this a couple of months back, so it's been
Yeah.
on my radar. And now that
It's
you've told me how good it is, that's going to
very
be on my
good. It
weekend
is,
viewing.
and that's the thing about Austin is when Joe Wright made his Pride and Prejudice, which I think is probably, I mean, there'll always be new versions of Pride and Prejudice. I'm going to start on mine soon, but like the film version, the Joe
Right.
Wright one, the Keira Knightley one, um, that has kind of been like the definitive film version of it. It's still missing some things from the book, but it is like, that, and Tom Hollander as Mr. Collins is a king in it. He's so great. He really is spectacular. And I still believe it was his performance as King George in the John Adams miniseries, that one with Paul Giamatti, that
Right.
inspired Lin-Manuel Miranda to make his version of King George for Hamilton. I really, truly, truly feel like they saw Tom Hollander and they're like, oh, that's what our King George is going to be. He's going to be that. He's going to be that guy. That's what I don't know that to be true, but I just feel like Hollander is so great, and so he's great in that. But anyway, when they wanted to make that movie, one of the producers was like, well, who is this Jane Austen? Did the book sell? And the person said, her books have been selling very well for hundreds of years. Yeah, I think we'll be okay. So all of that to say, it's hard to know if there's, because at any point in time, because it's in the public domain, anyone can put out a new edition.
Right.
not the band new edition. Although if we had one with the band new edition doing a musical version of Pride and Prejudice, I'd be here for it. But at any point in time, you can do that. You can put something new out. So you could put a new cover and you could just republish it, or you could write an essay and be like, "This is Singleton edition of Pride and Prejudice," and you just take the text because it's free, and you can republish it under the Singleton Classic Edition, and it's you writing an essay that's just like, "I've not actually read this book, but here's a new edition. Isn't that cover boss out?" And then people would buy. So it's like you wouldn't do that, but people do that. Like every year, there's actually Barnes and Noble, because as you know, I have a full set of Austen novels in every room in the house, and the problem is there's these new ones from Barnes and Noble. There's only 3 of them are out so far, but the covers are done by comic book artists. It almost looks like the woman who did Persepolis,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Beautiful. Hmm.
right? And so that's kind of what the cover looks like. That's what I saw. I was like, whoa. And so it's really good. They're black and red covers. And so I was like, well, I'm definitely going to get those when that full set comes
Right.
out. So, and they could just do that. They're Barnes and Noble. They could just every 2 or 3 years just republish them with new covers. The Barnes and Noble Classics edition. So,
And
um,
someone might want to pick them up.
I mean, I 100% am going to pick them up. I mean, the only 3 out. Once all 5 or all 6 of them are out, I'll get them, because she does, like, again, she did have an unfinished novel called Sanditon, um, that may or may not end up in this universe. But the BBC, or not BBC, PBS and ITV just finished a 3-season miniseries that I think was a really good love letter to Sanditon, and finished it in a way better than the book. She died while she was writing it, so they hired another writer to finish it, and it didn't click. She just didn't, because it was really just ideas that Jane had. It was an early first draft, and I get why you'd want to put it out, but it just didn't land. But I thought the way that this new miniseries was really a good love letter to her too. So there's lots of people who just love her, but there's a lot of people who don't, and that's the crazy thing. There's Janeites out there. There are people who just like me, just, oh, that's a Jane Austen thing, I want that. And there's people who are like, oh, that's a Jane Austen thing, that's lame. So yeah, my goal is to be the ones to get those people. I've converted 1 skeptic so far, so I'm well on my way.
Well, this is actually a great opportunity to talk about the fact that, in order to do this, you had to start as a J Knight. You had to become one of those who discovered these books and got to a place where you needed or wanted. I'll let you decide whether it was a need or a want to have a collection in every room.
Yeah.
Whatever your relationship with is, it however healthy or unhealthy you want to describe and reveal here. But when did you first discover these books, and was it an immediate, or was it a gradual sort of development to, hey, at some point, I think this is a book that, if retold the right way, could capture a new audience? What's that
Yeah.
evolution like?
Right, that's awesome. So, my mom was a big reader, and so I was a big reader. I could read at a very, very young age, and so I was always reading, punching above my weight, um, in the reading realm, just because when you're a ADHD kid who just who's up all night, your parents are like, here, whatever, just to shut up. Here's whatever. So I
Give
read,
them
and
something.
there was never, and they never, my dad was not a reader, but my mom was a reader, still is a reader. And so it was just like there was never a filter on what was allowed, or that's too above your head or whatever. I mean, I read Of Mice and Men when I was 12.
Nice.
Like you're like, okay,
Right.
that's yeah. Because there's nothing like having your 12-year-old think about accidentally killing prostitutes and then shooting a mentally handicapped person in the back of the head, and that's a happy ending. Like,
Friendship, no less. That's a good
yeah,
friendship.
that's a good friendship story. I know. Yeah. Key and Peele actually do an amazing Mice and Men spin. It's pretty spectacular. Anyway, so there was never any lines on that, but she just had what I call the big 3 Austen books, and so there was just this mythology that Jane Austen wrote these books, and she wrote 3 good ones and 3 bad ones. So Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, and Emma. And even Emma, people are like, Emma's because Emma's thick and Emma's an asshole as a character, and you're like, it's hard to get behind her sometimes. So it's like, even that one, but everybody acknowledged it's funny, which it is. And so those are the ones I read, and just like being wrong as we are, you just think, okay, that's it. I just have read those. So I know those. These other three aren't worth reading because that's just what's in the zeitgeist. And so it actually wasn't until adulthood, once I met Lee, when we kind of realized there was like a hole in our, we all have blind spots, right? Like for some people it is this. Like for me, not that long ago, I was reading a different book, like an advanced reader copy I got through NetGalley. I was reading this book, and they kept talking about Virginia Woolf and Virginia Woolf, and I had a big Virginia Woolf blind spot because wrongly, young dumb me, and I'm 50 now. I'm not young and dumb, but I still young dumb you is still in your head, kept
Yep.
saying like, oh, you don't need Virginia Woolf, you have Kate Chopin, which which is there. I do have Kate Chopin, but it doesn't mean that I don't also need to read Virginia Woolf. Like they're not the same woman. They're not doing this. They're writing about the same thing, but they're doing it in a much different way. And I didn't know. And so I only have one Virginia Woolf book left. In the last like 6 months, I've read all the Virginia. Well, both Lee and I've read all. She's read them all. I've got one to go. Virginia Woolf book, just like because neither of us, at 50, who are big readers, we'd never read it just because you have blind spots. So those three books, Mansfield, Northanger, and Persuasion, were blind spots for me. So we just were like, let's just read them. We love these other books. Let's do it. And so we just kind of did. While I'm not. So this was maybe 17, 18 years ago when this happened. So this wasn't just like yesterday. And then I was like, I'm going to write a book. I mean, I've read these a bunch and I've written extensively about them and for essays and things. But I discovered pretty early on that the book that I thought was the funniest, Emma, is still really funny, but Persuasion is actually hysterical and lovely, and I think it's brilliant. It immediately became my favorite as soon as I read it, and it is the only one where the characters are fully formed adults, not like in their 20s and they're not teenagers. They're like adults. Like Anne Elliot is, got one foot in the grave. She's 27. Oh no, so. And her sister's
Perish the
almost
thought.
30 and unmarried. I know. Yeah. So it's like all this crazy stuff. So love that book. And then Northanger Abbey, which is just a love letter to books. And it's really good. It's a love letter to novels. And it has this whole running commentary on the value of novels. It's so good. And then this is the one that was like, oh my God. What? And I ate it up. I mean, the villains are villainous and the hero is so good. And so as soon as I read these, I was like, just made it the yearly ritual from there. And then it was just sort of became a thing. Like we had a collection here and then we had a collection there. And then it's like, we're standing here and look at these covers are cool. And then I found these ones that were like drawn covers that are little old like Signet Classic paperbacks. So we got those.
Yeah.
And then the Marvel Comics put out some. So we got those, so it's just like, it just kind of started. And then it's become a thing. People collect things.
Tell me about the yearly ritual.
Well, it would just be like, I just want to go back and read one of them or reread several of them. I don't read all 6 every year, but it just was like, okay, I need to go back. I need to just go read it again. Like our time is finite. And you want to read all the new books. But there's still something about revisiting your favorite books. Like 1984, I reread every year or so. Catcher in the Rye, now the Austen books. I just, like 3 years ago, reread all of the Lord of the Rings. And I fell in love with Tom Bombadil again. And I know people hate him, but I don't. And I get why people hate him, but I was like, I love this guy. He's just walking around singing. He's like, hello, Tom Bombadil, boobity boo. Like, and I walk around singing and making shit up all the time. So I just loved him. So I just think there's something about revisiting them too, because every time you read it, you're different, right? Like, when we think about as comic nerds, we think about our into comics, the teenage us or the tween us or the 8-year-old us or the hiding them in the back seat because, you don't want to go to hell. That version of you sees the books that you read. Like now when you reread Neil, you're like, oh, you can also now at men of our age, adults of our age, we can look back on those early Neil books that you were hiding and you're like, oh, I can kind of see why my very religious parents didn't love Lucifer as a character because he's pretty sweet. Like Lucifer in the Sandman universe is a villain. It was like, how is he any different than the rest of these assholes? And Sandman is the worst. Like, Dream's a total jerk all the time.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, maybe these are bad role models, and I shouldn't have been reading these at 8, but we were, and we did. And so I just think you go back and you revisit art, because you do. It's the same thing. You go back and watch the same movies, or you reread a poem, or you don't listen to a song once and are like, okay, I've heard Fleetwood Mac's Rumors one time. I never need to listen. I'm done forever and ever. Of course not. And for whatever reason with music, we know that you listen to the same song over and over. It's because it's short. So there's nothing untoward about people who listen to the same music over and over, right? And in fact, that's what streaming music services want you to do. They want you to just listen to the same song over and over. So, but with art, with books and movies, it's like, well, there's so much new shit, and it's true. But every day somebody's putting out a new song, right? So I feel that way about books, about these books, and about the books that I love. It's like my favorite song. It's like a song I want to get back into. I want to revisit them. So it's not like I have a specific time of year, but like right now, because as I'm writing the new books, I will be rereading the book that I'm going to do. So I just finished my version of Sense and Sensibility. I'm doing the edit now. So then this weekend, I'll reread Pride and Prejudice. Darn. And then I'll start that one, and then when that one's done, I'll reread Emma. It's like, so then we'll see. Once they're done, then it'll just probably be like just whenever I feel like it. And sometimes just like on Jane's birthday, or sometimes just like on like Anne Elliott's birthday is specifically listed inside Persuasion. She's one of the few people who has a specific birthday listed inside the books, like when her birthday is. And I'm trying to do that for all the characters, give them some agency. but so I'll be like, oh, I'm gonna, because Persuasion's real quick too. It's the small. I could just be like, oh, I'm just gonna read this afternoon. Love Anne Elliot and move along. So, so that's it. So it's just that ritualistic idea of that. So anyway, so like the idea of writing the books was I finished my MFA, and you've read my thesis, which was nothing like these. It was 7 characters, all written in present tense, different voices, first person present tense, in linear fashion from 7 points of view. Well, 6, and one person's dead. So, but it's she's saying her words. It's in present tense to her, and
Yes.
yeah, and that was hard, and I don't recommend having 7 first person voices talking out of your mouth. But it was a challenge, because you got your MFA. You're like, they want to push you to do something, like
Right.
be inventive. And so I had a couple of other stories that I wanted to do. And when I went into my MFA, I thought I'm a short story writer. That's just what I thought, because that's what I was up to that point. Even the one novel that I had managed to cobble together was, I did it in a very Catcher in the Rye way, the way that Salinger wrote Catcher in the Rye, which was a collection of short stories about Holden Caulfield that he put together. And then he altered that, and like he published them as a bunch of short stories. And then when he republished it as a novel, he like took some of the parts out and moved it together. So that's kind of what I did with my first novel, my first attempt at a novel. And and I didn't really know what I was doing. And so then when I went to my MFA program, I'm going to try to learn to write a novel, because I was working on the will in my head anyway, just doing it in the MFA. So then I was like, well, what am I going to do next? I don't want to be done and be done. Like, I didn't get this degree. I mean, I did get the degree for all the work reasons, but I wanted to just keep doing something. And so I'd spent all this time thinking about Fanny Price. It's weird. In that same class, I wrote 2 critical essays, one about Fanny Price and one about Barbara Gordon. And DC Comics wasn't pounding on my door to write the Batgirl novel, although I was here for it at that moment. Like, I wrote a whole paper.
You still are.
Like, I mean, I'm here for that, people. Yes. Yeah, because I was doing character studies. And, I think Barbara Gordon is a fascinating character, and you know what she's been through.
Yeah. Great
She's
choice.
not real, everybody. Sorry. Like, we're talking about her, like, oh, man.
But she's real to us.
She is. And I mean, she's, Tim Drake is still my favorite member of the Bat family, but Babs is, 1A.
Yeah.
And so, so that wasn't there. That wasn't like the DC wasn't knocking on the door, and there's definitely not, there's definitely a copyright issue there. Maybe I could have written about Schmat Girl, whose name is Schmarbra Schmorden, but I decided to do this. So the idea was, like I said, I just thought somebody could I redo it? Could I introduce a new audience? And would that be something that was appealing? So, you know, like you do when you write books, you do it when nobody asks you to. You do it because you feel compelled. So you asked earlier about being compelled to have all the books in the house. Probably it's a little problematic. I mean, couple of copies of, I mean, the other books that there's multiple copies of in the house are like Peter Pan, Dorian Gray, Little Women, Scarlet Letter, um, you know, like stuff we love. But you know, Jane, there's a full set of Jane in the house. But Scarlet Letter's such a great book. Anyway, regardless of that, Frankenstein, several copies of Frankenstein laying around. Mary Shelley, genius, 19 years old. Wow. So
Yeah, humbling.
yeah, I know. Yeah, whatever. So anyway, so I was like, let's just do that. And I just thought, well, this would be, I mean, and then you also have to think like we want to get published, right? Well, there's a market for Jane Austen books. People like her. I mean, Claudia Gray does some. You know, she does Jane Austen murder mysteries, and there's all kinds of people which I didn't discover until very recently, but lots of people do this. And I was like, well, maybe it's a door. So I did it. I wrote it. And then, interestingly enough, there was a different publisher before I even sent it to Four Horsemen that I sent this to, who they wrote back and were like, "We are here for this. We give us some time. We want, you know, how you do a pitch, and you send whatever 50 pages. What is it? Is
Yeah.
it 50? Yeah, whatever it is.
Like 3 pages or 3 chapters or, so many thousand words. Like, I think
Yeah.
the last one
Okay.
I submitted to was, like, 5 or 8,000 words or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. So I sent that, and this other company, whose name I won't say here, but it was, they wrote back and were like, yeah, cool, we're interested in it. And I was like, okay. So I waited, and they were like, give us 12 weeks, and they were like, we just need a little more time. You know, we don't want to hold you up. So if you're still querying other places, don't you know, don't not take a deal because of us. And so then this deal came through. I accepted it. I emailed the publisher and was like, hey, you guys, this is what happened. Sorry, but thank you. And it was like 2 or 3 days later, maybe a week later, I got an email from that person that I sent it to, that I replied to, apparently didn't work there anymore. So the person who was making the final decision emailed me and was like, we want this book. And it was like a
Oh,
week after, but
wow.
it was, yeah, but it was just the one. I didn't pitch that one as a series. I pitched it as just a one off, which is how
Yeah.
I wrote it. So that was nice. So it was the idea of, you know, Lee and I were like, Jane Austen's
They
the
want
win.
me.
Yeah. Well, and they want Jane. And I do think I've read a lot of these modern day retellings of lots of stories, and they're not, I'm reading a Romeo and Juliet right now that I thought, it's not modern day. It takes place in like 1920s Shanghai. And I was really excited about it. And there's parts of it that totally suck me in. I'm like, yes, the Benvolio and Mercutio character. Of course, they're a couple. Doesn't everybody think that anyway? And they're just like naming it, and you're just like, yes,
Right.
I'm here for all this. But then it's like, then there's like a sea monster. I'm like, well, I'm not. And again, and I
Hmm.
love Pride and Prejudice and Zombies and Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters, but it's telling you what it is. It's telling you what it is from the beginning. Like, it's this. So that is disappointing. But I love these kinds of books, and I do think there's only so many stories to tell anyway.
Mhm.
You know, and we know as creative writers and as teachers, you know, it's man versus whatever, man, human versus whatever, person versus self, person versus nature, person versus whatever. It's like, you know, everything that's in Gilgamesh and everything that's in Beowulf, those are your stories, people. Go back to those two stories, and all stories are in those two, right?
You're welcome.
Yeah, there's family drama, there's love, there's unrequited love, there's villainy, there's treachery, there's, you know, backstabbiness.
Youthful
Those
arrogance and,
right?
mournful
Yeah,
reflection at the end of life and
right.
passing of time and
Yeah, there's only so many stories you can tell. So, you know, and these people, you know, Jane Austen and Shakespeare and folks like that. And I think they should be said in the same breath. People may disagree, but I think they should be. Those are interesting stories to tell. They're interesting stories to retell and to play in their sandbox. And it doesn't mean that you can't still write your own stuff. I'm still writing my own stuff, still writing stuff that's not, and I'm still, you know, these are mine. These are my own stories that are in this universe. I'm inspired by them, but that's all we are. We're all inspired by everything. We're inspired by that song we saw, or that sunset we saw, or something, you know. John Lennon said in the Imagine documentary, when the guy, like, I don't know, did you ever saw the John Lennon documentary that like that he made himself? It's called Imagine John Lennon. And there was some guy who's like sleeping outside his house, like sleeping in the bushes. And so instead of like calling the cops, he and Yoko invited him in. like gave him a shower and fed him and whatever. And he's like, man, you're speaking right to me. And you're writing about me. And he's like, I'm not. He's like, I'm so glad that you hear the lyrics and they mean something to you. And this is what John Lennon said. He's like, it's probably that I woke up and saw Yoko and thought, I love her. I'm going to write a song about her. And you just hear that. Or it's, and he said, or I just had a good shit that day. And so I wrote a song. He's like, it doesn't, I'm glad it speaks to you, but it doesn't mean that whatever inspired me is the same inspiration to you. Right. And so, like, we're all inspired by things that happen to us, whether it's, our wife or our partner or a sunset or another book we read or a song we've heard, or in John Lennon's case, apparently taking a big dump. You go, John. You wrote Imagine, so you can say whatever you want.
Go for it.
Yeah. All of that to say, like, I just feel like I want to tell stories. I want to tell stories that I want to tell. And I feel like so there was this idea I want to be published, but there's also an idea of like, I just want to tell these stories about characters who I can relate to, that I think other people can relate to. And I think Welcome to Mansfield is full of really relatable, likable, and sometimes unlikable characters. And I think that's important. I think like your villains need to be villainous, but they don't need to necessarily be Jafar. And, but they can be, because the bad people in this even there's my main character, like Junior in Welcome to Mansfield, she has a lot of sympathy for the villains. And I think that's really important as the tone setter for the whole universe, is that even the baddies, we're still going to love them in some way. Nobody's getting, exiled to Siberia. I'm not retelling the Russians. That's what Faulkner did, not me.
Right.
Yeah.
But you gravitated to these stories. You enjoy them enough to come back to them and to then tell stories where you're taking these characters and showing them in a new light. What were those attractions that you had to Jane Austen when you read it? Because you're describing these, wonderful ideas that, for anyone who hasn't experienced the book yet, they're going, okay, well, how is it perfect and how is it magical and what is it that I can look forward to? Let's say I take the risk and I try one of the classics, or I start with yours and it's going to show me things that I can keep an eye out for if I decide to journey back and go with those original. What captivated you about Jane Austen's works? Originally with those first three, that was your original focus, but then you experience these others which make you rethink. You have a paradigm shift, which is something you and I love to talk about.
We do.
Right? In that process, you go from this is the world to this is the world, and yet that expansion only seems to deepen your interest. But I'd love to get a sense of what it was that captivated, because one thing I keep in mind too is with everyone I talk to, I'm grateful when they describe this idea of like, look, there's writing that speaks to us in a way that we're going to turn around and read it, because then when we write, we're trying to do that. We're trying to capture that same feeling that captivated us and say to someone else, I think I can do that too with this story. So what captivated you about Jane Austen, the first books, the later books, the characters, which parts drew you in, and how much of that is part of what you want to say, you didn't know this from this, but I'm going to show you it in these?
That's awesome. I love characters, right? And I'm a character driven. To me, the best science fiction and the best fantasy is still character driven. The reason I think there's a lot of bad knockoffs of the Lord of the Rings trilogies, number one, they're just not as well written, but also they forget that it's about the characters. We do spend 100 pages with Tom Bombadil. Love him or hate him, you had a feeling about him. There's a writer called Lauren Oliver, a YA writer, and she's written some adult books too, but like mostly she writes YA. Some of her books piss me off. I'm so mad at these people and the things they do. And that is the realization that that's how good of a writer Lauren is that she's making me angry at these people who aren't real, but they feel real. They're sitting with me and I'm pissed at them. So like this book makes me mad because these people are so stupid, but it's like, if she wasn't so good, I wouldn't feel that way. I'd be like, this is dumb people doing dumb things. I don't care. So what Austen did is she set place. The place was always a character, which again, we're all from somewhere, right? Allison does the Where I'm From series for a reason. We're all from somewhere, right? That's part of us. That's part of our origin story. And then so Jane's origin gives these people really an interesting origin stories. And sometimes they have to move because of tragedy. Sometimes they're stuck in the same place all the time. Whatever it is, the place is always real. And then the characters are fully realized. We meet them, except for Fanny, who's a little kid. We meet her and we see her become fully realized. But she, even still, 5-year-old Fanny Price is still at her core this really amazing good soul. She's a good person who isn't judgmental, she's not one of those people who because she doesn't do something you do, she's not judging you. Like, as a straight edge kid, you know, and like you were,
Yeah.
so it's like it's and I was not the same version of straight edge because it wasn't religious for me. It was just a choice to not be a drinker, and I didn't do the drinking and the drugs when I was young. And I know for you that was behind it too. But you were still pretty straight edge in high school, right? You weren't.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
extremely. No, it
yeah.
wasn't until like I remember my parents were really clear with this idea of like when you're 18, you can do what you want. Like that's and I was like, okay,
Okay, and then then you
yeah,
did.
once that happens, well,
Yeah,
all right,
yeah.
what's out here? Yeah, hey
Right,
guys, I've arrived. It's my time.
right. Yeah.
Let's what do you got? Like
What do you?
who's holding?
Who's holding? Right. Yeah. That but I see. I stayed straight edge for even into college. But it was my choice to do it. But it is still a hard thing. And as you know, when you are the straight edge kid at a party at high school and everybody's drinking or getting stoned or dropping acid or whatever, why was there so much acid available in the 80s? Who had it? I never understood how everybody got it. It was just always around. I'm like, this thing is making your brain bleed. You're 15. Where did you get that?
Well, so at least where we were, there's a lot of industrial chemicals because
Ah,
of the local environment, which was a farming
gotcha.
community, and you had a lot of bored kids, and the
Us
ones who
too.
just had enough
Oh,
chemistry would just sort of like, "Hey, did this kill me yet?"
let's
No,
figure
and I
out how
didn't
to drop
lose too
acid.
many like,
Yeah.
I didn't lose too much of my vision or my hearing didn't go completely gone or you know what I mean? Like it
Yeah.
didn't kill me, it must be
So
fun.
it probably
So
wasn't like Timothy Leary acid they were on. It was whatever they made with
yeah,
tinfoil
it
and
was
bleach.
whatever they could. I
Gotcha.
mean, unfortunately, for where I was, we had stuff going on. Like meth was really big. Junior high
Oh,
meth was huge, and also there was black tar heroin was
oh,
really a big deal because it was very cheap. It was easy to make, and it was easier to get than booze. But we were a small town, so most people there was also a huge we had all the small town vices you could get your hands on that were
right.
cheap and easy to produce.
And
And I only
secret.
knew
Yeah.
this because I'd hear the stories and I'd be like, "Whoa,
What? I know.
my
Right.
weekend was not like
Yeah. I
that."
did not do those things. Exactly. And so it's like when you're the kid, though, who's not doing the things,
Right.
there's this
What do you
from the
do?
kids who are right. Well, their sense is that you're judging them, but you're not. You just didn't care. You're just like, and so you're not casting aspersions. And Jane's books, except for Marianne Dashwood, the star of the one of the co-leads of Sense and Sensibility, for the most part, her female leads aren't super judgmental. Even Emma, who is pretty judgmental, her heart is in the right place. Like Clueless is based on Emma, and Emma is a bit of an
Right.
asshole. But like she doesn't
The
know
intention.
because right, she doesn't know because she is the one who is the spoiled rich girl. Like you know, she doesn't know what she doesn't know, and that's the point of that story, is for her to learn, like, oh, I am being this and I want to be good. I didn't know because my dad couldn't raise girls. He didn't know how to, their mom's dead. He did what he was doing. So I get all that. So there was just something about these characters that seemed so real. And as a person who made choices, a person who chose to read books, a person who chose to not drink, a person who chose to not smoke, whatever, like all of the people in these Jane Austen books, they seemed very confident in themselves. And then, and I'm not always super confident myself, but you still make a choice. We all are feel we're imposters. And then as an adult, when I read, when I read the other books, and those are more um, like they're a little denser. Mansfield Park, and obviously Persuasion's about adulthood, and Cat is this book nerd, and it's like, so these characters that I met at a different stage of my life. I wish I had read Northanger Abbey as a kid, because Cat is so cool, and I'd have been like, hey, I see you being seen, I see you. The book people are my friends. Yeah. And so it was just, there was just, so the magic is just the reality. Like there's this idea of telling truth, and people are like, why would I read a book when I could just hang out with my own dysfunctional family? And that's fair, but you don't get the perspective. Hanging out with your own dysfunctional family doesn't give you the perspective that reading about somebody else's dysfunctional family can give you, because you're too close to it. So I wanted to tell stories about families, about class, about education, about gender, about all the things that Jane Austen did. But I wanted to do it in a modern way, because we have, in 200 and some years, we've come pretty far, but we've not moved at all. And I know that's a trite thing to say, but it's true. And some things just are universal. Some truths are universal, which is one of her most famous lines, from the beginning of Pride and Prejudice. And what she says is a universal truth is not necessarily truth universally understood. Hers is about a man with a large fortune needing a wife, being want of a wife, but that is the truth universally understood. It doesn't mean that it is true, right? But the fact that, yes, everybody does think that is a thing that people think. So I just think she's just saying honest things, and I think art is a place for us to say the things that need to be said, and we work through our own shit when we write too. It's like, whether you're writing science fiction or fantasy, whether there's dragons or people, or X-Men, you're still dealing with something. You're still working on your own stuff. I think every artist is working on their own stuff. Like, I always feel like Tom Taylor's Nightwing run of the last couple of years, he was working through some stuff with that. And while that is one of the most joyous 2 years on a run of comics ever that I've ever read, he couldn't have done it if he weren't feeling something, because that is a book just packed with emotions, and it's so good. And so I always feel like, too, when I'm writing stories, Jane Austen captured the magic that you said, because she had stuff to say. She had stories that she had things she wanted people to know about. I want people to know it's okay to be good. I want people, just because I'm being quiet, it doesn't mean that I'm not thoughtful. Not every space needs to be filled up with your voice. Or if you do want to say a lot of words, that's okay too. But know that just because the person isn't responding to you, they're not judging you, they're thinking about it. Like, as a person who's more of a talk first and think later person, you also, you can project that onto your characters too. So I just think, like, Welcome to Mansfield, I really wanted it to be that experience of going off somewhere new. Like, that's, she's a fish out of water, right? She's a Southern girl going to the North. Um, which is automatically a thing when, as again, we are from small towns, and when you live in a big city now, and I don't, but I've been there, and I've been to other big cities, and it is always a weird thing, right? When you're like, oh, that things are different. And so we all have been a fish out of water, and it can be the other way too, right? Even if you're the city mouse, when you go to the country, it's different,
Mm. The
right?
adjustments.
Yeah. And so I think that's the other thing Jane does, is because while everything feels small, there's always a new character, there's always a new situation, or they just go on a picnic. But that is so different. It's such a big event. Like, you're like, let's go on a picnic. Why is that? It's like a whole day event for them to go on a picnic. And they have to have this, and they have to have this, and there's like, how many people are going to be invited, and we got to worry about how many people are going to be at the dinner party, and that's like a whole event. And and that's a life-changing thing, because most of your day is just trying to, like, not get dysentery, right? And that's not a book you want to read. I mean, that's so.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. I love characters who have truth in them, and I do think a good story can help us reflect on ourselves, help us find out who we want to be. And so if there's anybody who's read this, who reads Welcome to Mansfield, and it's like, oh, Junior's pretty cool. Like, it's okay to be true to yourself. It's okay to just say no and mean it. You don't have, like, peer pressure doesn't have to exist. It's okay to not be judgmental. It's okay to be forgiving. Like, that's who she is. I'm not Junior Price. I wish I were, but I'm not her. But I created her, and she's important to me, and part of me is in her. But I'm much more like some of the other characters, but it's like, I aspire to be her. So I think with each of these stories that I'm telling, my main character is going to have, you're everybody that you write about. You're in all of your characters. So,
Right. So one of the things that I think is kind of fun is that when you're doing something like taking a story that you love and telling it to a new audience, you also get to do things that maybe weren't possible at that time. As you pointed out, um, sometimes going on a picnic took all day because, well, you're dealing with transportation that takes a bit longer to use. You don't have the technology that we have at our fingertips that allows for communication to occur much more rapidly than, say, sending a letter by post and then the response and how much time passes. So you have the opportunity to speed some of these things up, which maybe frees up some time for some other things. Were there things that you were coming into with an intention when you were writing this book, with like this awareness of like, look, I know I'm telling a story that's already been told by Jane Austen, but here is what I'm doing. And I think you set it up well at the very beginning when you said there is there's an intention about making some of these characters specific to a degree, and then beyond that the specificity is the interpretation of the reader, their ability to cast their mind's eye on the character and create them. That's one difference. Are there others that
Hmm.
you're saying, hey, look, Jane Austen did this, I'm doing this when I'm telling this story. I believe in the power of the story and all of the characters, but this is what I'm doing, and this is what you're going to get that's different from what you might experience from Jane Austen. Not just language and lexicon, but also what you can do maybe more of or more with that wasn't possible in the first books.
Sure, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, she's always writing about class and gender,
Mhm. Still
subversively.
very relevant ideas right now.
Correct. And so I made it much more overt. And I often say I didn't realize my financial status until I went to college. Like I didn't know until I went to a small private liberal arts college that I was like I didn't know. I thought everybody would just live like this. And then I was like, there's people who have more than me, there's people who have less than me, but we're all kind of this. And then when I went to Albion, I was like, oh, I'm poor. I didn't know. I thought we were, like I didn't understand what wealthy is. And I didn't like I learned the difference between rich and wealthy
Mm,
at Albion College.
gotcha.
Um, because those are different things, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I think I remember it described well. It might have been Chappelle who said, "Yeah, for those of you who are thinking about Shaq and how much money Shaq makes, what I'm talking about is the guy who owned the team
mm,
and pay Shaq the salary." And he goes, "In my mind, that will always be the difference between rich and wealth.
right. And you know
Rich
what?
means you're
Shaq
getting paid, wealth means you're paying
and
because
Shaq
you're
is
making
doing that, right? I mean, now he's in every
right."
commercial for a reason because he's not in commercials for stuff he doesn't own part of. He's no dummy. He may
Exactly.
play a dummy in all those commercials, but knows exactly what he's doing. Good for
Right,
him.
and
Yeah,
and that shift, where
yeah,
you're working for someone and they're paying you to do it compared to where you're running something and you're paying people to do it, there's that very significant, perspective, so I always keep that in
yeah.
mind.
Yeah, and I think in the Austen books, and so in Mansfield, Junior is poor, and in Mansfield Park, Fanny Price, they're poor, 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 but they're related to. So it's sisters in my book. They're sorority sisters because cousins. So I
Right.
had them not be real sisters. Um, but like two of them, two of the sorority sisters are actually cousins, but they're not. Like, but the main character, Frances Senior and um, Mariah or Senior, they're not related because their kids are gonna smooch later. So I had them not be cousins. So um, so that was all. That's what I did. I saw as a sorority sisters would be fun to do and be a way in. It'd be way in the door. But anyway, so in the original book, there's the poor kids who are the Prices, and then Norris um, in the original, her husband was a minister. They're very well to, they're fine. They're kept. They have a home that's provided for them. They have a stipend, whatever. When he dies, she's taken care of. She's fine. She's
Mhm.
fine. But then there's the Bertrams, and they own a sugar plantation off the island of England and on off the UK, but in a different island. They've got it going on. So like
Right.
that is there. So I wanted to make sure it isn't explicitly said in Jane's book. It's just very clearly it's clear. So I was like, let's just call it out for what it is. Let's show these three levels of like because the professors that you meet at Mansfield College, they're all living in campus housing. They're all doing very
Mhm.
well. They want for nothing. Part of their salary is free room and board. Like
Right.
that's well to do. Like if you live at a place and part of you're still getting paid really well to work 8 months a year and they're giving you a house that you can live in for 12 months a year, they don't kick you out. That's sweet. But the people who run the college, the people who own the college, the people who started the college, their families got more money than you. Um, and so what about the kids? What about the grandkids and the great grandkids of those people? Do they recognize their privilege? So there's a conversation about privilege always in every Jane Austen book, male privilege, financial privilege, and I just address it. Like in here, Junior talks to the cook
Okay, nice. And that's
because
gonna
that's weird. Like
but
nobody
it's
there.
also someone that maybe is the easiest to relate to,
Right.
just a
Well,
hardworking
yeah.
person who's putting
And
in their
she's
time,
yes,
and by
exactly.
comparison, that's who you can connect with first easiest.
Correct. And like she struggles when she wants to call people Mr. Like she's a polite Southern girl. So she wants to be a polite Southern girl and she wants to say sir to people. And they're like, you don't call me one of the guys says to her, you don't call me sir, ma'am. You don't call me sir, miss. That's what he says. You don't call me because she's not a ma'am. And she's like coming right out of the side of her head. Like to live in a place where there's a servant who she at 16 years old is being called miss. And she's not allowed
Right.
to call this adult man who's older than her mother, sir. That's not allowed.
Mhm.
He stops her. No, you don't call me that. And she's like, what the hell? So like I address that directly on. And so those are things that were important to me that they're there. And then that I address them. And then this whole idea, they're setting it in a college, as you know, it's important to me. It being, I think liberal arts matter. So this is
Yes.
also a love letter to the liberal arts. And while Jane's books don't specifically address education in the exact same way, but all of our heroines are literate, right? So that's
Right.
a big deal. Like for Jane, it's important. Like none of them are dumb. There's no
Right.
dummy. I mean, they do dumb things, and some of the side characters are dumb dumbs, but even they can read, they can do, which is all a
Mhm.
woman in 1797 or 1804 could do, is for
Right.
herself. That was like an act of rebellion to be a reader. So the conversation about the power of education and how it can better your life. Music is a big deal in all of the Jane Austen books. Like there's always a pianoforte, there's always a ball, there's always a
Right.
party. So music is huge in all the books. In this book, I have had Junior Price is a big classic rock, 80s, 70s and 80s classic rock, because you know how it is. You like what your parents like at first. That's what you like. Like your first music you listen to is what your parents listen to.
Mhm.
And then eventually you get your own style or you don't. And I've known people who never grew out of that. Like I know people our age who never listened to anything that was recorded past like 1968. Like all they
Mhm.
like is the oldies. They
Right.
get Sirius XM just to get 60s on 6. Like that's their thing. They're like, I need that 50s on 5. Give me that. And that's all they want. And
Right.
that's awesome. And they're our age. They're not our grandparents' age. But so that's part of it. And she and her dad don't have a very close relationship, but this is the thing that they both love is this classic rock. Like that nobody else in the family cares. And there's a whole scene where it's a memory of she and her dad bickering over what the best track on Pyromania, Def Leppard's Pyromania is. But nobody cares. They're like, we don't care.
Except them, because
Except
it
them.
matters. And it's one of those few things that they can actually have a conversation about that doesn't, feel like it's skewed or conflicted, or one party's only saying half of what they want to say because, right,
Right.
there's that.
They're free to talk about classic rock. Like who did it? But are you a Van Halen or are you a Van Hagar? Like where do you fall on that? Like, and they disagree on that. And so,
Gotcha.
she's for Sammy all day long, and he's a Diamond Dave guy. And they like, she thinks about those arguments that they had. But like, so the reason that music is important in all the books, and in this book in particular, I made each person like their soundtrack. So I listen to those. Like her favorite band is the band Tesla. And
Oh yeah. Okay.
yeah, I love and
I had a
I
friend
love
who was
I'm a big fan. So I listened to a lot of Tesla while I was writing this, but I would also listen to like if you hear a song in the book, I was probably listening to that song at the moment, or like I've created Spotify playlists. And I'm not a big streamer. I don't like to do it, but I also want people to connect. So I have created Spotify playlists for the books. So as I'm doing my revision of the second book, I'm adding the songs in. So like you could
Nice.
go to my website and you could see the link. Like if you wanted to listen to the music from Welcome to Mansfield, you can go to Spotify and you can listen to it. And you could hear all the songs that are mentioned in or that are inspired by, like, I think Youth Gone Wild is on the playlist. Skid Row's Youth Gone Wild, kind of, even though that wasn't in there, there's kind of a moment that Youth Gone Wild was kind of in my head. But
I
there's
like
like a
it.
couple
Little
of boy
soundtrack for the
bands.
book.
Yeah, I'm doing that for all the books. They're going to have soundtracks. And I
Nice.
mentioned the song specifically in there because Jane Austen music was a really big deal in all the Austen books because that's what they had. So they entertained themselves. If you're a person of a certain class or whatever, even if you weren't, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, but you're just, this, you could still play the piano or you could play the lute or whatever. You could entertain yourself with music. Music is the universal language, and music doesn't know class or race or gender. And
Mm,
so
I like that.
music is a theme throughout all the books. And so every character has a soundtrack and that I listen to while I'm writing. And I'm working on the third book soundtrack in my head right now. I still need to figure out exactly. And like for this book, the one I just finished, the second book, there were a couple of times I'd be like, let's try this person. This seems like it would fit. And it was like, oh, that didn't work. I can't listen to that person while I'm writing.
Ah,
And same thing with Welcome to Mansfield. So like Tesla a lot, but like OU 812 and 5150 and Balance, those three Sammy Hagar Van Halen ones. Listen to those a lot. The first Skid Row album I listened to a lot. Just because, and I know those are weird things, but those are music she liked. And so that's really important too, is there's events too. There always has to be a ball. There has to be a thing. We have to have at least
hmm.
one in every story. There has to be one big event, because whether it's a wedding or whether it's in Mansfield Park, they go on a walk. That's the big event. And I know you're like, really? But it is. They go to somebody's house and they go for a walk. And then Fanny gets left behind. And in mine, they go to her virgin show of Rocky Horror Picture Show, and everybody leaves her. They either fall asleep or leave her, and she's alone at the end of the night. But she's happy. She's content, because I feel like Fanny in the book is content to just be like, I'm just going to sit here on this bench. It's lovely. It's okay
Right.
that I'm out. So like I just try to.
I got what I wanted out of the
Yeah,
night, and I'm
yeah,
still
yeah.
great.
I'm good. Yeah. Um, and so I just think there's just lots of things like that I want to make sure that are still there. But education, reading, music, those things, there's in every book. And the thing is like, some of the people are better at music than others. Some people are smarter than others, and those are all conversations that are being had throughout all the books. So I'm having them too. Like, what are you good at? Like in Sense and Sensibility, Marianne Dashwood is a bit of a drama queen, so I just made her an actor.
Mm,
Like in my version,
right.
right?
Right.
Like Norris, Auntie Norris in the original Mansfield Park, she's the Mrs. Reverend Norris. And my version of Norris, the husband's not even in the original book. So I was like, I don't need him. So she's just single, but she's a minister. And so,
Gotcha.
like, because Reverend Auntie Norris in the book is very pious and misquotes scripture and does all these things, and and just uses that as a clutch, as a club. So I did that too. So I want to make sure that the characters are still true to who they are, but I still want to have those conversations, because there's this running thing of faith behind. Like, nothing of the Jane Austen books are very specific, like, but one of the big things you can be is a clergy. That's a big reward. Like, if you can be a member of clergy, you're doing okay. Second sons are often clergy members. That's their big reward,
Right.
or like, it's a good enough living. And Jane was the son of a clergyman, or the daughter of a clergyman, and so her second oldest brother was the second son of a clergyman. She saw what that looked like, and she's like, oh, you don't get a lot of options, soldier or clergy. So there's a thing, like, right early on in the book, Bill, her older brother, says, we show them the Little Lees. They call the kids the Little Lees as a nod to Scott Westerfeld's Uglies books, as he calls the little kids Little Lees. So that was me saying to him, I see you, Scott. I've read your
I
book.
see you, Scott.
Yeah. But there's a conversation where Bill says, we've shown them there's ways out. Like, we're not stuck here, and the name of their town is unincorporated nowhere. Like, you're not stuck in unincorporated nowhere. Like, he joins the Air Force. She goes to college. They're like saying, and they're like, well, maybe Susie, the third kid, she'll find him a third way. Little Lee's a third way, but like we're showing them a way out. And so those are things in Jane Austen's books, like education and military, like being a military service. It's a way to make yourself better. And so I want to make sure those things run through it. There's always somebody who's going to be serving in the military, even if it's just a background character. There's always going to be somebody who has either studying religious studies or studying philosophy. Just like in all the Jane books, there's always going to be music. So I want to like love those things, but bring them to the modern lens. And what do they look like now? But how are they still doing the same work? You know, right? You don't know somebody, but like you go to a concert, you could leave with the best friend, right? Because you know what you both have in common? That band, because you're here.
Right.
Right? It doesn't matter who you are, what your background is, who you voted for, where you're from. But if you're in San Francisco or you're in Detroit or you're in Nashville or you're wherever, and you both happen to be in that city at that time, at that show, you are there. And that is a common thing. So music is such a common thread. And my hope is that my Austen Chronicles create a bond too with Jane, but with each other, you know, the characters and with the people. They're like, oh, you know, I want to build a community. As a writer, I would love to build a community of people of new Austenites, but also of people who like this series, who like the Austen Chronicles series. Like, you are now all in on the group, and it's not exclusive. There's no wall. I'm not having a gate. I want these in libraries. They're already in some. I spoke to 2 librarians yesterday who are adding this book to their library. So that's 2 more. My library has one. Kyle Stuke added one in Arkansas, Fayetteville, Arkansas. It's in their library there. So you just never know. Like, but that's the goal, right? Is to tell art and to let art be a way for us to connect, even if we disagree on other things. We both liked this book, or even if there wants to be a we hate Welcome to Mansfield party. Hey, I brought some people together. That's cool.
Right. I mean, one thing that I'm going to reflect on, I think probably for even once this conversation is done, is that idea that when you have these universal threads going through, it gives everyone the chance in your book to weigh in on them. Music is something that everyone's going to enjoy for the reasons that they do. You can show music appreciation through every stage of class, through every age. You know, as you pointed out, you know, for every example there is of someone who's like, yeah, I don't listen to anything past the 60s. You know, I'm reminded of the selling point behind the first Guardians movie, where you know, our Star-Lord is basically saying, look, my mom introduced me to pop music so that I could have this relationship with something she loved, and also because it was a reflection of like our time. It was almost like each song's a time capsule for these moments. So you have these ways that everyone can relate to music, and you can tell these stories, starting with this first book, where you have these characters responding to things like reading, writing, literature, books, responding to things like music. And through that, you get the chance to show more than one perspective, and through that, deepen everyone's understanding of the characters through something that they all understand and the reader understands, music. And then through the interpretation of that idea through each character, not only showing what this thing means to each character, but telling us about each character by how they respond, how they inform us about what their desires and preferences are. And doing that then again with faith, with service, with career, with caste. You know, you have these wonderful things that everyone can respond to. So I was thinking about that, and I just wondered, were there some surprises that you go in with an intention, and then of course there's discovery, and along the way, were there moments where you said, I learned something new, I get to do something, here's an opportunity that I didn't even know until I got to this point? Anything along those lines where it's like, I get to do this now, or I saw something I didn't know I was going to do, and now here I am. It's a part of what I'm doing.
Yeah, there's one of the side characters in particular. So I kind of knew, you know, what the journey of the main character is. So I knew what
Right.
Junior's journey was going to be. Although, to be fair, because her book is, you know, takes place over like 15, 16 years, mine was going to take place over 4 years, and it ends up being like
Right.
6 months, which that was the surprise. Um,
Okay.
But the next one is 5 years, which was the original intention too. But like, I was like, I even just comment in as my snarky narrator. I'm like, we're just skipping this stuff. Nothing happens. And I do it like,
Moving
we'll go through,
along.
literally, like I even say, we'll just watch it as a montage. So I'll say the name of the song that's playing, and then they watch the thing that happens. Well, it's got to
Nice.
get to the next year. So that was surprising. But I didn't actually know. So there's a line that Junior says. I don't think so. That's one of her lines. And I are in the my original intention was she was going to say it to somebody else. That her final time she says it the third time in the book was going to be somebody else than whom she says it to. And I don't dream. I mean, I dream. We all dream. I'm not a robot. I'm not. This is not a. I'm not Deckard. But some days, you ever have those days you wake up and you're like, man, if Deckard showed up with the test right now, I might fail. Like,
Yes.
you ever have those days in your brain, you're like, am I a replicant? I'm not sure what's happening. Anyway, so I don't remember my
Argument for
manuscript.
another day.
That's another story about a different book. But anyway, so I I'm very active and talk to my characters, and they're in my head, and I have conversations with them, and I'm like think about them, and I talk to them, and they whisper to me. I hear them all the time, like not in a really schizophrenic way because I know they're fake, but like I hear them. So one day I'm awake in bed, and I like a lot of times I get up and I don't get up because they're like, oh, we're getting up at 7 and it's 6:30, so I'm just gonna lay here and listen to the radio. Which again, by the way, radio is free. Everybody, if you can buy a radio, music is free. And you can probably go to Goodwill right now and for $1 get a radio that you can just turn on. You don't need the internet to listen to music. That's the other thing about music, right? Music and books are free if you want them to be, if you go to the right places, libraries and the radio. So anyway, so I listen to radio. I listen to NPR a lot, like the BBC overnight service. And then, so when I can't sleep, I just have my little sleepy headphones. So one day I'm laying there listening to NPR or whatever, and it was been like in one of those breaks where like Junior said what the ending was. I was like, aha, cool. So I wasn't expecting that. But the rest of it, like I knew her journey, I knew the final idea of what would happen, but I didn't know how I would get there. And then Julia, the youngest of the Bertrams, the four Bertrams, she wasn't supposed to be as big of a character as she became. And she's an activist, and I didn't know that. I was surprised by that. But I was almost like I felt like she in the original book, Julia Bertram, is a passenger in her out of control sister's life. And so she's always lumped in together with Mariah Bertram. And I was like, but I don't think she is. Upon careful read, I don't think that's true. And then as I was writing it and I invented Julia, I wanted them to be sisters who love each other and stuff, but also kind of hate each other and stuff, like sisters can, like siblings do. And so I didn't know as there's a chapter called Driving Miss Julia, where Junior and she are just out doing stuff, and she starts talking, and early on in the book, she's like, she says to Bill and Junior, she's like, I know this sounds terrible, but I like being me. I like being a Bertram. I like it. I like being rich. I like my privilege. I know that I'm privileged, but I feel like I've got stuff to give. And that I just wrote as I was creating her as a character, like just for her to be so honest. As the youngest sibling, no, she doesn't feel like anybody's listening to her. And these other two kids are here, these strangers, and they are giving her full attention. And so she's kind of got the verbal diarrhea. So once she did that, once she started telling her own story, I was surprised at her journey and her future. And that's what I do a lot. I give you a peek into the futures of the characters. I'm like, oh, that'll happen later. Like Yates, who's one of the characters in here, who's the character in the original Mansfield. I say something about he goes on to be an award-winning actor. Like we don't see it. It doesn't happen. Just so you know, he'll be fine. Everything will be okay. Yeah. So like things like that are fun. But yeah, it was really interesting. So with the side characters, the way their development happens in like the new characters. So I created a character called Aaron for this, which he was just supposed to be a one day. He was not in the Mansfield Park. He's just a character that she meets at college, her first friend. And then I was like, he seems pretty cool. Let's keep him around. And I could have gone in and like added him in, changed who he was, but I was like, I liked him enough. So that was always surprising when the side characters become important because they're the heroes of their own story, right? Aaron's got his own journey. And Maggie, and then the other characters that you meet, like Maggie Dashwood for the next book, she's just a side character in this, but she's important. And now I'm telling her journey, and then, so that's just been cool too, to think about them. Yeah, but that's just always surprising to let the story take me. I'm not an outliner. I'm a writer. Like, I don't know how you see people who can talk their books. Like when they're
Right.
writing, they just talk into a recorder and then they transcribe it later. I can't. I'm not a storyteller that way. I'm a writer. I need to write. I'm a
Right.
typist whose brain, like, I'm listening to music with words, and I'm not like typing Tesla's lyrics. I'm not even hearing them at some point in time, even though I'm totally singing along. The way it is the way that it goes, and I'm typing something else. That's just how it works. But if I were talking, I couldn't listen to the music. I couldn't do it. Like, it's just the way I'm wired. So that is always fun too, is to feel like, did that song inspire me? Like, was I listening to a sad album at this moment in time? Did that accidentally, did the story dip because of what was happening, what was just on repeat, or what was playing in the background? Like, oh, this is sad. Wonder if that song was playing. It's just
Right.
kind of, so those are fun things too, and to think about. But yeah, I let the story happen, because I spend so much time with the characters in advance. They talk to me and I talk back, and they become my friends. So then when it's time, I just got to tell their story. Like Mary Bennett, who's the star of the third book, she has been antsy for me to finish the second book. She's like, I got stuff to say, man. And I was like, listen, Mary, I still have to reread your book. And she's like, you've read it enough. That's where we're at right now.
So you're negotiating with Mary,
Yeah.
and
She
if
just
nothing
needs to
else,
give me a
trying
couple more
to,
days. Yeah.
right, just work with me here,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay? I know you're there. You've told me you're there. I'm not going to forget you're there.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah.
you let me finish what I'm
Just let me
doing, and then I'll.
finish. Yeah. Yeah. So that's fun. And if you develop realistic enough characters, then they can live. And you want
Yeah.
people to not, you don't want, a good book ends and you feel transported,
Mm.
right?
And wanting more a little bit, because there's
Yeah.
a feeling of completing something and then going, okay, let's do that again, right? I
Right.
mean,
Or
there's
what
a
happens next? Yeah. None of these are going
exactly,
to end with an ending.
lovely,
You know what I mean?
which
They're all going to end. This story arc ends, but
right.
I mean, none of them are dying at the end. Spoiler alert.
Could
I'm not
you
killing any of my main characters. So they have lives to live.
you will get to enjoy these characters fully, not only at the beginning but at the end. And I wonder, have you had any hints along the way where you're like, I know there's six, but there's offshoots, there's tangents, there's the popular spin-off idea where you could see another book connecting to one of these books that's not part of the big six, but is a nice opportunity to go in one direction or the other, and capture more about what specifically was going on around the same time as Welcome to Mansfield or book three or book five. Has there been any hints, peeks, teases of
Well, I
that?
mean, because of the love and friendship books, because
Hmm.
Jane Austen did write an epistolary novel, I
Right.
could write an epistolary novel. I don't love
I
epistolary
believe
novels,
that's
but I've
true.
also never written one. So
Right.
therefore, it would be an interesting challenge to do, because then you're writing in first person, different voices again. But it has occurred to me, if I wished, to kind of do follow-ups or in betweens, like love and friendship, where the characters, either the side characters, are writing to each other, or where our main characters in the shared universe are like community, like we're glimpsing, they're not together anymore because they've graduated from Mansfield, they're out in the world. So here's what's up, here's what I'm up to. But in this
Mhm.
world, the only problem with it is, in the world, people don't keep written records like that anymore. Epistolary novels are harder to do. So they would have to be like a collection of texts and phone excerpts more
Right.
than emails and letters, because people don't do that. Now, Mary Bennett, she would definitely be somebody who will write letters forever. So maybe, but so I have considered it. It isn't a no. But like I like I'm already like the fourth book. So I'm telling them in this order. So I'm doing Mansfield Park, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Northanger Abbey, Persuasion. That's the order I'm telling them in.
Hmm.
I already know, like Jean Fairfax. So this book is this one I just finished called That Other Dashwood Girl, because that's a line from the first book. Maggie Dashwood feels like she's that,
Right.
because it's from her perspective. She's like the forgotten character in that book. And then Pride and Prejudice, I'm telling it from the middle sister's perspective, Mary Bennett, and so that one is called Universal Truth, because she's wants to be an educator. And when we meet her in Welcome to Mansfield, she's the president of the university. So we're going to go back to when she's 18, 19, getting ready to go to Mansfield College.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were saying. I remember.
Yeah. So
Remember
she's
you might have.
and then 4, 5, and 6 are in real time, like we're finishing up. So Junior will show back up in books, in book 5 for sure. Book 4, she's in it because she and Jane share a few scenes in that, and that's where the fourth one's going to start. But I've already started thinking about Jane and her soundtrack because she's a pianist in the book, and Emma, Jane Fairfax, is a pianist. And it's one of the million things that pisses Emma off about her. She's so good at everything. And so, and she's great at music. Everyone's like, oh my God, Jane Fairfax. And so and Jane doesn't really know Emma at all and doesn't get why they're enemies. She's like, we don't even know each other. Like her version is like, Jane's version is like, Emma, why are you up my ass all the time? Like that, there's no swearing in these books on purpose. They swear all the time, but you don't see the swearing because it's Jane Austen. So it'll be like, Marianne Dashwood, swear, blah, 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 but we can't recreate that here. Like, I'll just say that as the narrator. Like, we just can't do it. But, so they're in the real world. They swear and do stuff. You just don't see it. You don't hear it. But anyway, so Jane, if anybody were to swear on the pages, if I were to do the PG-13 rule where you can say one fuck, it would definitely be Jane Fairfax who says it. And it would be, what the fuck, Emma? That's what she would say. So I appreciate that as a thing. So, I could spin off, but these people have really got a lot to say. Julia, so far as the side characters go, she's the one who's got the most interesting story to tell from this one. Like Tommy and Yates and Mariah, they're fine, and the Crawfords, they're villains, whatever. They don't really have a side story as much, but she does. And so we'll see. There's a side character in the Sensibility, Juliet, who leaves the book, and has an event. It could be fascinating to see what she's up to because she moves to Canada. So it could be interesting. But she's not in the original book either. She's not one of the real characters. So we'll see. I mean, right now I'm on a pace to get all 6 books done. If I can keep it up, I could probably have all 6 books done by 2025. And so then we'll see, because they're not going to come out that quickly, but I could have them done by then. So
do you want me to edit this so 4 Horsemen can't hear that? Because
no, I mean, no, they're not. They
just
know.
teasing with the idea of really, Tony? 2025? We're ready. Go ahead.
No, they're not going to be ready because they're changing the way that they release things anyway. No, I'm going to stick to my publication schedule. You don't want, these are long 100,000 word books too. It's not like,
yes,
I understand if I were putting out, 30,000, 40,000 word books. Yeah, you want one every 3 or 4 months, right? You want to do like the Green Mile, where he put out a book a month. Right. You remember
exactly.
that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember one time when I was buying those and they were coming out, the woman at the bookstore said, if you just waited, or she's like, when you're all done with these, you're going to have spent like $22 on these. And I was like, if you put this out as one book, it'd have been $29. It's Stephen King. She's like, oh,
right.
Yeah. I do not want me to buy this. I'm here at your bookstore trying to buy this on the day. Because I bought those Green Miles the day they came out every month. I was at the bookstore.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man. Hey. I loved those. I was just such a cool idea too. The way that he did it is that pulpy cereal. But anyway, so yeah, I'm not opposed to that. We'll see. I'm not holding myself to that. I've got other projects, stuff we're working on, you and I. But like sometimes, when the muse arrives, you have to listen.
Yeah. No. It's fun because I get these ideas because of other people. I was lucky enough to have a colleague, a classmate, Alka Joshi. She's got the
Yeah, you
the henna
re-released that.
artist.
You re-released
Huh?
that recently. Didn't you re-release it, or was she on a second time?
No, I don't think I re-released it. I'm not sure. Maybe it sometimes I'll
Maybe it
go in and edit something and it'll re-release it, and I'm just fixing, like, I'm adding
Oh,
a
that must have been what it was. I was like, "Okay," because I was
yeah,
like, I saw
yeah.
it and I was like, "Oh, I remember that." Because you had told me all about her. That's amazing that you went to school with her. She's really good.
I'm actually I'm lucky in that I know her, and then I also know do you know Molly Prentice?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
Molly Prentice, but I know the name. Yeah. You
We
know
were
Molly Prentice. Yeah.
classmates my first year there. I remember we were the first 2 up for, workshop for our short
Nice.
stories, and now she's Tuesday Nights in 1980, and what is it? Old Flame, I think is her newest one, and you're just sort of like, "There goes that rocket ship." Like,
Yeah, that's pretty
"Wow,
cool
there
though.
you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Bye."
Yeah.
Well, the reason I mean, I'm not just going for name drops. What I remember Alka telling me, when we were talking was that while she was working on the henna artist, there's a secondary character who's like the loyal faithful assistant who's just always making sure that all the things that this person who basically changed his life is taken care of. And then at some point she realized, like, that's my second book. This character needs to go off and go from what he was, which was helping someone who no longer needs his help. Well, people kept asking her, what does he do? What happens to him? And that was the impetus for, like, well, let's find out and
Yeah.
then discover along the way. And that was never part of the plan. Her intention behind the first book was a love letter to her mom, where she was like, this is the story my mom could have lived and didn't get to, so I got to write it in fiction.
That's
um,
awesome.
it's a great, I love that. And it was something that was really important. I keep this in mind too, because I'm curious if there's a parallel. She said for her, that was one of the things that she really needed to get behind when she was telling the book to other people, when she was trying to get it out there. And that when she was going through that pitching process, was she felt she needed that part of her story to become part of her query in order for people to go, okay, I understand what you're telling me here. And that connection of those two was, so I was also just curious when it comes to the Jane Austen books. I feel like we've gotten really close with this idea of, this is someone who was able to capture all of these great ideas, was able to tell the perspectives of multiple characters through these wonderful themes, like we were talking about, whether it's faith or music, or literature. And if along the way, that has been part of your process, was that like a desire where, like, hey, there's a personal part of this for me too. It's not just that I love Jane Austen, that I believe in these stories, that I can tell more about it, but is there something that you get to do for yourself, these characters, or something else through the telling of these stories? So that sort of just wrapped me around that direction, where I was like, huh, is there a personal story that goes with these stories for you as well? Is there a personal connection to these characters, to Jane Austen, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it just comes back to, I still have my Walkman from when I was a kid. Um, like that still plays cassettes, it still works because, and this is a
Right.
deep cut. This is true. The only way you can get the the Less Than Zero soundtrack is on cassette, and I still have that. Like you can put all those songs together if you wish, but I still have them on cassette where, Aerosmith's Rock and Roll, Pneumonia and Boogie Woogie Flu and LL Cool J's Going Back to Cali are back to back. Like I've got that,
Right.
you know, um, on a cassette. And so
Yep.
I always loved me, like, as a little kid, I would lay on the beanbag in the basement and listen to the Beach Boys on these big, just like these big over ear headphones. Those big ones, like your landing airplane big ones.
Oh yeah.
And I just
ATC.
always, yeah, I would just always listen to music, and it was always telling me a story and whatever, and I was just kind of living in my head, and so these characters are that way. They've got big internal lives. There's not a lot of dialogue in these books, which is different than the Will, which was like, the funny thing is the Will was only like 78,000 words, and it's longer than either of these books. And both of these books, one was 98,000, the next one's 104,000, and they're not as long because there's a lot of internal dialogue. The narrator, the cheeky narrator, is butting in all the time and telling you, and it feels like you're being talked at, but you're not. You're like in on the story. You're like, hey, let's watch. And I want it to feel very cinematic. And I always have, the reason I like crazy ex-girlfriend and I like musicals is because I kind of want my life. Like I love to be a musical. I want to be able to sing my truth and then not have anybody really hear it, but I got to say it out loud and stuff like that. And so I always love that kind of thing about storytelling. And so, yeah, I mean, these are like music, literature. I mean, not faith, but I was raised Catholic and it's part of who I am, even though I'm not on that team. I wouldn't even say I'm Christian, but it's there. You can't get away from it. And you can't get away from it. I mean, it's part of who you are. You can't get away from it. When I met your wife, she was talking about going to grandma's church and like can't get away from it, man. It's just there, right? Whether you believe that or not, it's just there. And so those things are there. And so I want them to be part of this story because they're real to me. And I think those are universal things. But I also believe, I truly 100% believe education is the equalizer. And I don't mean like you have to go to a small private school that you can't afford to go to. I mean education, whatever it is, whether you're learning to be a welder or you're learning to be a pipe fitter or you're learning to be a car mechanic, you have to learn something. Like nothing, there's very few prodigies. And that's what's going to be interesting about the Jane book is that everybody thinks Jane Fairfax is prodigy, but we're going to learn she's working her ass off to be good at music. It's a job to her that she takes very seriously. And there's like, oh, you're so talented, Jane. Oh, you're so awesome. It comes so easy. You know how that is, how people say that to you. It's like, oh, you backed into whatever the thing is. Joe Hill, you're Joe Hill. Yeah, but your dad is Stephen King. But nobody knew your dad was Stephen King until they knew. Like you got published as Joe Hill. Nobody in America would publish Joe Hill. And like all these British books were like, oh, he wrote this really creepy short story. Let's include it. That's how Joe Hill got discovered, was in England, right? It wasn't like everybody was knocking on his door because he deliberately wanted to be published as Joe Hill, not as Joseph King, because he knew he wanted to prove himself. You know what I mean? And I get it. He's still a child of privilege who could sit around and have the money because his dad's Stephen fucking King and he had plenty of time and space to write and think and do. But education is the great equalizer. Working your ass off for a thing, working hard, honing your craft, whatever it is, and practicing and having a mentor and all those things that we have had in our life, whether it's at your MFA or in your undergrad or in elementary school, you had somebody along the way who helped. And in all of these, every one of my characters has a Yoda or two to be like, let me get you there. Let me get you, because we need that. And as teachers, that's there. So throughout this whole series, every person is going to have, nobody is John McClane, right? Everybody needs some help. And that is specific to these characters. Like they all find salvation in other people. Even though Sartre said hell is other people, which is true. And I just said that to Jack the other day. You still need some good ones. You need a mentor. And we are that as teachers. Don't you love it when you get the note from the teacher that's like, hey, thanks.
Oh yeah.
Will you be a letter of reference for me? Right? The fact that they think your word matters so much that they want you to talk about them to somebody else is pretty cool. So those are all things that are part of me that are 100% in these books. And I hope that we all know nobody does it by themselves. I don't write these. I mean, I write the books by myself, but I talk to Lee every day. I have readers. You share ideas. You're like, oh, what do you think of this? Whatever. Nothing is ever done by itself. Just like I'm using Jane's stories. She's my kind of mentor and Sherpa through this journey, and then hopefully I'm somebody's Jane Austen Sherpa, and then they can be somebody else's. So that's the dream, right?
Nothing happens in a vacuum, right?
No.
And also, as you pointed out, I really love that theme of, if you want this thing, whatever it is that you want, it takes work for everyone. It takes knowledge and it takes, the willingness to try. So, there's a lot of great things that I think so many people can connect with. Okay, so let's do the business side, and then you and I are going to stop recording and talk like
we got a few other things
human
to say.
beings.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of things. So I'll just disclose that Tony and I are working on a project with a publisher, and recently in a meeting that the publisher hosted, they said, hey, I love the idea of you being on a podcast, but here's what doesn't work for me. You being on a podcast and it not equaling sales. So I would love for anyone who's heard what we've been talking about to know where can they go and get the book, because we mentioned things sort of off to the side, like Four Horsemen. And so let's point out Four Horsemen is your publisher. They are a direct market where people can go. I'll include links. where else can folks go where it's like, hey, you want my book? Go here.
Sure. Well,
I'll give you a
so
chance
my
to just sort of like
website,
give the round.
yeah, my website is the best place. So arfarina.com. There's a buy now button right there in the center of it as soon as you go from the homepage. And so click that, and that takes you to Four Horsemen's page. And then you get to pick. And it's got everybody. Like they're on like all the places. Like so you can get to the big ones, right? Amazon, Barnes and Noble, but you can go to bookshop.org, which is really cool because the bookshop.org is where you can pick a local publisher in your or a local bookstore in your own town, and they'll get a cut of it. So wherever, if you want to go, if you want a Kobo, that's a thing still. If you want Google Books, if you want a Kindle, if you want a Nook, whatever, anywhere like that. A couple of overdrives have it already. I know that. So that is the big thing. So if you really want this, if you're like, I want to kick the tires, here's the one thing I would recommend you do. Go to your public library. Go to your public library. You, everybody. And this is the best thing you could do is go to your public library and request this book and then get it that way. And then if you like it, maybe you buy a copy. And if you don't like it, the library bought a copy, and then the next person can get a chance to read it. Go to your digital library, go to your Hoopla, go to your cloud library, go to your Libby, and request it there digitally as well. Because again, it gets out there. And we live in an algorithm now. Hal has won. And so we need Hal to tell us that things are okay and that it's, and so you need to do that. Like if that's the way for me. So of course I'd love you to buy it. I'd love for it to be a sale, but a sale can also be the library buying it. So if you're like, man, it's a tome, and it is, it's big, it's a doorstopper, it's 100,000 words. So if you don't want to spend that, I totally get it. But the digital copy is only a few bucks, and request it from your library. That would mean the world to me is to see this book in libraries because that's where it belongs. I want it to be, again, if education and literature and music are the great equalizer, they need to be accessible to everybody. And so even if you're planning on buying a copy, which would be awesome, if you still request it for your library so that the other person, so you could say, oh my God, I read Welcome to Mansfield. Either here I'm loaning you my copy or it's at the library because I requested it there. So that is the thing that everybody listening can do is go to your public library and request this book and anybody's book. Anybody if you've got a friend who's written a book and you want to help that person out, you've already bought your one copy, request it for your library. It's not a friend, just for your favorite author that you're like, oh man, that book's hard to find. See if your library can get it. Libraries are the answer. So that is the business side of things. Please, please, please check out my
And then last
website,
thing.
all that stuff, but add it to your library. That doesn't cost you anything because your tax dollars are already there, man. Put them to work.
Gotcha. And I'm squeezing this in because people are waking up, so there's cupboards and dishes, and you
Yeah.
might hear some background noise. But I was also just wondering, do you are there places where people can go soon and maybe check you out appearing anywhere? I mean, I was lucky enough
Oh,
to break into your busy schedule and get you on for a bit, but is there a chance you might be appearing somewhere where someone can be like, oh, hey, I'd like to see if Tony says other stuff about his
sure.
books or writing or things like that? Where are you going to be popping up soon?
Well, I did an episode of Genuine Chit Chat about the book, so
Nice.
Mike and I
I'll
talked
find a
there,
link for
and
that and
yeah,
add that
yeah, and
definitely.
I'm gonna be Kyle and I are gonna do. I'm gonna be on Humming Fools, Kyle Stukes Humming Fools. You read one of Kyle Stukes'
I
short
did
stories.
do that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'll be on Humming Fools soon, and then I'm in the process of doing things. But I'm every week on Comics in Motion. I've got a show where it's me talking about art and the things I love. It's called Indie Comic Spotlight. That's every Thursday, and there is a once a month I break into Indie Comic Spotlight, and Dave and Max and I do a thing called Mandatory Music and CD, where we break down an entire album track by track. So that's once a month too. So you can hear all the things, art and literature and music on the Comics in Motion feed and your favorite podcast catcher. And of course, there's the Sonic Salon, which you don't hear me on, but I put things on. The day that we're recording, there's a new one up. We had 3 Lindas in a row. Linda 2 weeks ago, a Linda today. There'll be a Linda next week on the Sonic Salon. But that is a place where different people are reading and recording short stories or poems or whatever they want to share with the world with no gates. And that is a project you helped me launch. And it's every 2 weeks. It's called the Sonic Salon, and it is an excellent place to share art, and I'm really proud of it. And people listen to that because it's free art in your ears every fortnight.
All you got to do is click. And then where can people keep up with you best, probably for like social media, where long after this has been.
Instagram and
Yeah.
Facebook. I mean, Instagram's the best. I'm most active on Instagram. I'm bad at Facebook. Trying. I'm bad at Facebook. I said, like I'm 40,000 years old and not 50. But yeah, just and you can follow all those links on the website AR Farina. But it's just A.R.Farina at is my Instagram. I'm pretty sure. I think because I'm
I'll
already
have
logged
links
in.
for that.
Yeah, I just put sorry. So yeah, but go to
No
my
problem.
website and then the cool thing, if you want, you can sign up for my newsletter at the website. And once a month, I send you a little mini essay about whatever. And when you sign up, you get access to the archive too. So it's not like you just sign up and you don't know. So if you sign up now or you're hearing this in the future and it's now 2026 and you're just hearing this, you can go sign up. You get the entire archive of every single newsletter that I put out. I send you a link to the archive for free once you sign up. And so then it's once a month essay about whatever I'm feeling, and then notes from my bookshelf and notes from my keyboards. You kind of know what I'm up to and what I'm reading because I'm constantly reading. I read several hundred books a year.
And that are all the great places you can go. And folks, I'll have links for all of that. And man, congratulations on
Thank you,
your
friend.
debut novel.
You were here. You
And
were here with me the whole way, and I appreciate it.
it's been a pleasure. It's been a joy to watch. And I'm hoping that it inspires everyone who's been watching what you've been doing. Go, it's possible. Look,
It
right
is.
there.
It is. I mean, I'm 50. My name is Sally O'Malley, and I am 50 years old. And it doesn't matter, man. You got like Alan Bradley didn't publish the Flavia de Luce novels until he was 80. Like
Yep.
those books are bangers, and I'm just telling you, keep doing your art. Just keep doing your art. It's just art matters so much. It matters to the world. Seems like it doesn't, but at the end of the day, everything is art. You're all going to be really sad this fall when there's nothing new to watch on TV, and you're going to be like, oh, the only good thing about the writer's strike will be like, I never did watch that amazing show that I should have watched, and now maybe you'll go back and watch it, and those writers can get some residuals. But like art matters. It's how we get through our day.
Definitely. And should you feel like maybe you need to give your eyes a break from TV, well, why don't you pick up Welcome to Mansfield and give it
That
a
would be
read?
amazing.
And,
You could read it, and the
yeah,
audio. And if you want to hear it this fall, Ada McCartney is reading the audio version. It should come out sometime
that's right.
September, October. Yeah.
And if you want a teaser for that, I'm just going to play off of what Tony's been doing here. You can already hear Ada McCartney doing readings of Tony's work, no less, on
Right.
Sonic Salon.
It's
So
true.
want a teaser for what you might have coming your way when the audiobook comes out? Go check out Sonic Salon. She's already got the One Door Policy by Tony Farina as far as a short story read for you. And then wait for the audiobook. And in the meantime, get the physical book.
That'd be awesome.
And
I'd love that. Hey, and if you
wonderful setup.
Here's my deal. Here's my pitch too. In addition to if you get this and you like it and you're like, hey, I'm in a book club, I'm going to recommend this to my book club. Here's what you can do. You can go to my website. If you and your book club do my book, reach out to me on my website and I will happily zoom into your book club and take questions during your roundtable, whatever. If you've got the technology for your book club, I'm happy to show up.
Man, how generous are you with your time? We're going to find out.
We're going to find out. Yeah.
Thanks, man.
That's a good
this was
point.
a lot of fun.
If this was a big hit, then that may be a mistake. But I'm owning it right now. 6/29/2023. I own it.
Right. And
Thanks, man.
We'll check back with you. And oh, my pleasure, man. This was fun. Okay.
Yeah.
The recording thing is done. We're going to be civil human beings. Thank you again.
All right. Dude, that was great.